Good morning. It is 9:04 a.m. on February 13th, 2013, and this meeting of the Camino Real Regional Authority Board is now in session. Ms. Rowe, are there any public comments?
No public comments.
Item 3, discussion and action on the election of the CRRMA officers. A, Vice Chair, currently Mr. Adame. B, Treasurer, currently Mr. Marcus. Secretary, Ms. Melendez, and Alternate Secretary, Ms. Holguin. Are there any questions or comment on the current slate of officers? Is there a motion to approve the current slate going forward for the upcoming year?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries. Adoption of minutes for the CRRMA board meeting of January 16th, 2013. Has everyone had an opportunity to review those minutes? Any updates, additions, deletions?
Move to approve.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those minutes are approved. It's been one of those days. Item 5, presentation from the CRRMA's General Engineering Consultant on recent work completed for the 4th, 5th, and 6th direct connectors for the Americas Interchange Project. Mr. Tejas.
Ray Mateus, Executive Director. I thought today what we would do, because the 4th, 5th, and 6th direct connectors are a little bit unique in that the RMA is not actually managing the construction of it, so we won't actually have a grand opening ribbon cutting sort of an event. I thought because we were only tasked with the design, I thought that I would bring back the design team and update you all in terms of what our general engineering consultants completed for TxDOT timelines and associated information. So with that, today we have with us Rick Prieto from the AIA engineering firm, who is part of our general engineering consultant team. Mr. Prieto? If we could have IT bring up, oh, it's up, thanks.
Good morning, I'm Rick Prieto with the GEC team. And what I'll do is I'm going to go over a little bit of a summary of what we actually accomplished with these the 3 connectors that were just finished. We have the project location here, of course. It will be at the Americas Interchange, constructing the additional 3 connectors. As you all know, the first 3 are already up and going, which were the southbound and westbound, east to north, as well as the north to west. Here you have an aerial view of the completed work. Our task was to actually do the westbound and northbound, westbound to southbound, and the eastbound to southbound direct connectors and approach structures as well. The design did entail that we actually did roadway work along the main lanes, the frontage roads, as well as creation of a couple of ramps, and drainage design, as well as some high mast illumination. The westbound and northbound connector basically consisted of a 2,160-foot bridge, which was a 3-lane concrete approach structure. The actual 1-lane connector was a 1,330-foot connector with a pre-stressed structure in nature. We actually did have to create a temporary entrance ramp at the Zaragoza, as well as auxiliary lane between entrance ramps and exit ramps. Our original NTP was actually on December 13th of 2011, and the anticipated letting back then was to be for June of 2012. However, we did actually complete this and submit it to TxDOT on May 4th of 2012. This connector, as well as the other 2 connectors, were eventually grouped into one package. And you have here the westbound and southbound, which consisted of a 520-foot concrete 2-lane structure, as well as a steel span, several spans of 1,040 feet in length, and also a departure structure, which was 1,280 feet in length, as well as containing 3 lanes. NTP on this one was actually March 23rd of 2012, and the completion that was anticipated for the lighting actually was going to be August 2012. However, we did submit the 100% plans to TxDOT on July 20th of 2012. And the last of the 3 is the eastbound and southbound, which consisted of a 1,380-foot concrete direct connector structure. NTP on this one is actually on July 11th and 2012. Back then, the anticipated lighting was actually October 2012, but we did turn in the 100% submittal to TxDOT on August 3rd of 2012. We have here is a summary, and what we did is we actually did combine all 3 of the packages into one big package. The project did lead on October 10th of 2012. Total design time for the actual 3 connectors was 8 months. And the not-to-exceed amount was basically a little over $4.1 million to complete the entire design. And due to the fact that we actually kept the design team, streamlined everything, we used the same personnel, which really did help us in getting them 3 connectors done at one time, and actually had a savings of a little over $1 million to complete the work which was done. This slide here kind of just gives you the bid tabulation summary. Our engineering estimate was a little over $43.4 million, and the actual low bidder, which was J.D. Abrams, came a little under 2%, which was $42.5 million. With that, these 3 connections will be done. I believe the NTP is going to be starting next month, and a scheduled time frame of about 24 months to complete those 3 connectors. The 2 remaining, which would be the southbound and eastbound and the northbound and eastbound connectors, we're actually in talks with TechStart right now to try to get this design started here in the next few months, and with construction dollars to follow later. With that, that's kind of a summary of what we have done. And is there any questions?
Nice job, Mr. Prieto, getting the design 25% under budget, or the not-to-exceed amount. So, and then an additional, look like another $1 million on top of that in the letting. So at the end of the day, $2 million saved in regards to the construction of these 3 additional DCs. When did you say construction of the 3 DCs was going to start? Do we know?
I believe NTP will be next month.
So they'll start in March?
Yes, that's correct.
And did I hear about 24
About
months
24 months
to complete?
Yes, sir.
Do we have any traffic counts in regards to the 3 DCs as far as how much they're currently being utilized today? Is there anything that we have in regards to, I know they just opened a little under 2 months ago.
I don't believe any of that has been done yet.
Okay. And as far as the design of the additional DCs, the final 2, which will bring it to the ultimate configuration of 8, what is our timeline as far as looking at beginning potentially that design?
That's kind of been hammered out right now, but we're trying to get negotiated with a fee and get a set timeline to see how many months that would take.
If I could interject on that one, we've received the fee estimate from the general engineering consultant. We've provided that to TechStart, and TechStart's reviewing that now. So they've had that for a little while. Once we, so at some point we'll sit down with TechStart and iron out the rest, and then I'll be back to you all with the agreement for the general engineering consultant to complete these 2.
And a lot of the design efficiencies we got on the additional 3 was the fact that it was the same team, basically, that had designed the first 3, knew the project, didn't have to get up to speed, and so could fairly quickly get this work done. Is that correct?
That'll be the same for these other 2, actually.
So the same sort of efficiencies would come to the table again?
That's correct.
Good. Any other questions for Mr. Prieto?
Raymond, what happens to the $1 million we saved? Do we have to give that back?
Yes, sir. Unfortunately.
Nice.
Actually, there was a reimbursement model, wasn't it?
That's correct.
So
So
they
we never got
reimbursed
it.
us up to $4 million, and it was completed for a little over 3. Is that correct?
That's correct.
So,
But I would note, though, I really did want to thank the general engineering consultant. They did this work extremely fast and did a really good job.
yeah, it appears that 1 or 2 of them came in 1 or 2 months earlier than anticipated, because everything was done in July for the July letting. So I think the westbound and northbound got done fairly quickly, but the other 2 had to be compressed. So very nice job on your end to get that work done.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Prieto. Item 6, presentation, discussion, and action to accept the fiscal year 2012 annual audit per the recommendation of the CRRMA Finance Committee. Mr. Diaz?
Yes, Raymond Tejas again. So today, I feel like I ought to give you some background on this item. As of late last week, we had 2 remaining outstanding items in order to bring forward a final, or rather a final draft version of the financial statements. And today we have with us Janet Pacheco-Morton, who is part of our outside audit firm, and she's going to go into greater detail. But I did want to let you know that we had 2 items last week that we felt that we were going to be able to resolve before yesterday's Finance Committee meeting and ultimately today's full board meeting so that we could accept the final financial statements. Unfortunately, we weren't able to resolve those 2. We have resolved 1, and 1 remains outstanding. Those two items relate to the city's reconciliation of cash accounts for us and confirmation of the way that TxDOT books its payments to us in relation to the federal funds. The TxDOT item has been resolved and our financial statements have been updated, and the remaining outstanding item deals with the city of El Paso. So with that, I'll turn it over to Ms. Pacheco-Morton. She can get into a greater level of detail with you all.
Thank you, Raymond. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members of the board. Again, my name is Janet Pacheco-Morton. I'm with Clifton Larson Allen, and we conducted the audit of the Camino Real Regional Mobility Authority for the fiscal year ending August 31st, 2012. So that's the period we'll be covering today. On today's agenda, which you have in front of you, I'll be going over required communications, and those are communications that we are required to provide to the Oversight Board, all of you, that are required under auditing standards, and those are the standards that we follow as auditors. I'll also go over the opinions, and today we'll be covering two opinions. One covers your financial statement information, which includes all of the financial data, the statements up at the front of your financial statements, and all of the footnote disclosures. The second opinion covers your OMB A133 report. And what that is your compliance audit over your federal funds, your federal expenditures. So there are two opinions that we'll be providing. I'll also do a review of findings, both any findings we had in the prior year as well as the current year, and our completion procedures as of today. Okay. Okay, so our responsibility under Statement of Auditing Standards number 114 is to provide some significant information as a result of our audit. The first is whether we had any changes to your significant accounting policies. And we did have one significant change this year. This year we did implement a new GASB standard, and that is Governmental Accounting Standards Board Pronouncement number 60. And that's the long version of GASB 60. And the name of this GASB is Accounting and Financial Reporting for Service Concession Arrangements. I know the title doesn't really tell you much, but what it deals with is with third-party relationships. For instance, the relationship that the RMA has with the Texas Department of Transportation. What's currently happening is the RMA is incurring costs on behalf of the Texas Department of Transportation. Some of the costs are reimbursed at 100%, some of them are not reimbursed. So for the portion of the costs that are not reimbursed by TxDOT, at least not this year but will be in future years, there is a potential for your financial statements to be skewed. For instance, in prior years you may have noticed that you had a deficit net asset balance, which is your retained earnings in public sector speak. That amount was over $200 million in prior years. What this GASB allows us to do is record an intangible asset for the portion of the costs that are not being reimbursed currently, and for those costs to be amortized over the life of the costs incurred. For instance, the debt associated with the costs. So for the Spur 601 project, we had a significant amount of debt. We had about $233 million in debt associated with that project. So what we did is we did capitalize the portion of costs that were not reimbursed by TxDOT currently, and those will be amortized over the life of the debt. So this year, and I'll go over the numbers in just a minute, this decreased your deficit significantly. So your financial statements they're a better reflection of what's currently happening at the RMA than they were before. You really don't have a deficit fund balance of $200 million, as has been shown in the past. It really is less than that. And it's a timing difference because at some point you will be getting the toll revenues to help pay off that debt. The next item is significant accounting estimates. And we have two estimates within the financial statements of the RMA. The first has to do with compensated absences, and the liability itself is not an estimate, but the portion that we consider the the current portion or the portion that will be used within the next fiscal year is the estimate. So for instance, Raymond is the only employee of the RMA, and there's a certain amount of costs associated with his leave. And we believe that those costs will be incurred in the next fiscal year. He'll take his leave within the next fiscal year. That amount is not significant to your financial statements, but I did want to point out that that is one of the estimates. The next estimate is having to do with the life of the intangible asset, and this is related to GASB 60, which we just discussed. And the life that is currently being used to amortize those costs is the life of the bond, which is about 30 years. Correct?
So if we don't give Raymond any vacation, our financial statements will improve?
Absolutely.
So
I'm
moved.
not recommending that, though.
Can't get away with anything today.
Let me go back to a question on GASB 60. You were talking about some timing differences on the reimbursement from TxDOT. Were you specifically talking about the spur and the debt that's associated with the spur? And as you know, it's a pass-through financing arrangement where we have certain minimums that TxDOT pays us or on traffic counts. So was the difference what you were talking about on the spur earlier? Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. Any other questions related to that? Thank you. So some other items that we are required to communicate have to do with whether we had any disagreements with management, and I'm happy to say that we did not. Whether we consulted with other independent auditors, and we did not. We did have this year, the RMA did contract with Peña Briones, and they came in as a consultant to help with the monthly bookkeeping. And we did consult with them with regards to financial statement issues, but doesn't fall under this particular item since they weren't independent auditors. We did not have any issues discussed prior to retention, and an example of that would be whether we would take on the RMA as a client had we had any issues related to our feelings over the integrity of management. We did not have any of those types of issues that we discussed. We also did not have any difficulties encountered in performing the audit. We are waiting on some information from the City of El Paso with regards to cash, as Raymond alluded to earlier, but that is the only remaining item. Overall, we did not have an issue with performing our audit. Now these are, this next page, the GASB 60 adjustments. I just want to briefly go over the impact on your financial statements that this GASB did have. The first item is the intangible asset that we did book, and these are costs over the life of the Spur 601 project. So we went back in time from the inception of the project and picked up all of these costs that were previously expensed and picked them up as an asset. So there was a restatement in your financial statements. The intangible asset that was booked was about $174 million, and that is net of accumulated amortization. That's amortization that would have been taken over the past, from inception of the project through today, of $41.4 million. The current year amortization of the asset was $10.8 million. So those are the costs that we took in related to that project in the current year. The effect on your net assets, I just wanted to do a comparison. Your fiscal year 2011 deficit before implementing GASB 60 was $229 million, almost $230 million. After implementation of GASB 60, your deficit is $45 million. So that is a significant change in the way your financial statements are reflected. For 2012, your ending deficit balance is $58 million in your net asset balance.
And is that deficit again reflected based on how we are getting reimbursed on, let's say, the debt on the spur?
Yes, there's a timing difference there. Over time, the revenues, as the revenues come in and you pay off the debt, that should net to zero over time.
And Raymond, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think TxDOT reimburses us quarterly, is that correct?
On the Americas?
On the spur 601?
Oh, I apologize. Biannually, every 6 months.
So every 6 months. So the fact that we get reimbursed kind of in arrears based on traffic counts, that's what's driving this deficit, or a large portion of this deficit?
That is a portion of it, although you are expected to receive more revenues over time, but we do accrue the current year's portion of revenue that you're expected to receive.
And there are minimums that are associated with that twice-a-year payment, correct, Raymond?
Yes, sir.
And we've been hitting the minimums, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And if we're above the minimums, then we can pay the debt down faster on that particular project.
That's correct.
So at the inflection point where traffic counts begin to rise and we're above the minimums, then we can pay the debt down faster, and I believe that's what we do with the additional funds, or I think that's what the program is. Thank you.
Correct.
The next item is any significant adjustments that were made as a result of our audit. We did make one adjustment, and that was not a correcting entry, it was an accrual entry, and these are typical during the course of an audit. And this was to accrue interest on the state infrastructure bank loans from TxDOT in the amount of $1.5 million. And that's the amount payable in the amount payable as of August 31st, 2012, that was not paid out during the year. There were other various adjustments related to the GASB 60 conversion, but those are all related to implementing the new standard and not correcting entries. Now, perhaps the most important portion of an audit is your independent auditor's reports. Again, the first auditor's report is over your financial statement information. That includes all of the financial data and all of your financial statement disclosures. And I'm happy to say that we will be issuing an unqualified opinion, which means that you received a clean opinion. That's the best opinion that you can obtain from an audit. Over your OMB A133 report, and this is your compliance audit over your federal funds, we also will issue an unqualified opinion and no findings related to your federal funds as well. The RMA did qualify as a low-risk auditee this year. It was a high-risk auditee in the past because it was the first 2 years of receiving federal funds, so that's a requirement. And we have had no findings in your single audit over the course of the past 3 or 4 years that you've had a single audit. So that's a very good thing. You qualify as a low-risk auditee. Now, the federal program that we tested is the ARRA and non-ARRA Highway Planning and Construction Program. And this is the program that you receive pass-through funds from the Texas Department of Transportation. This year, you had about $55 million worth of pass-through funds and expenditures. In the prior year, we did have one significant finding. It was considered a material weakness, and this was related to activity that was not booked on the general ledger of the RMA within the city's accounting system. These were all of the funds that were held at Wells Fargo Bank, the trust accounts. So all of these funds were rolled into the city's books this year. And again, Raymond took immediate action by hiring an external accounting firm to help with that process and come in and do the monthly bookkeeping and make sure that those records were up to date. So this finding is cleared in the current year. You will not have a material weakness related to this issue in the current year. For the current year, we don't have any audit findings as of today. We are waiting on some information from the City of El Paso to confirm the cash balances. So pending the information and assuming that that information will tie to your general ledger account, we're currently saying that you do not have any audit findings. If there are unreconciled differences between what the city's records show and what we show, then there will be potentially a control deficiency, and depending on any variance, the amount of the variance, it could be a significant deficiency or a material weakness. But as of today, we have no findings.
Mr. Tejas, when do we anticipate getting the pending cash confirmation from the city?
Well, we're hopeful to have that information sometime today or tomorrow. We're working with the city, and we've expressed to them the urgency the urgency of this item, so as soon as possible.
Ms. Pacheco Martin, when do we need to have the confirmation to you? Is there a certain date that we need to have that to you? Is that within a week, 2 weeks? Is it by the end of the month? When would you like to see that?
Obviously, as soon as possible, but there is no definite time frame for that. But as soon as possible. The longer you get away from your audit report due dates, your internal due dates, the more likely that you have a finding of control deficiency, because there is it leads to a problem within the control system, or indicates a problem.
All right, and just kind of discuss the point a little bit. We in our board meeting basically follow the city's investment policy. All our funds are basically in the city ledger or in city accounts, and what we're looking for basically is just a confirmation between us and the city with what we show is in the city accounts and what the city shows is in their accounts. Is that correct?
That's correct. And the city holds funds on behalf of the RMA in their pooled cash. So what we need is a confirmation of the portion that belongs to RMA within their pooled cash.
Any questions from the board?
Is that the reason why the funds are invested at Wells Fargo as opposed to a community-owned or a community-based bank?
That's correct. They act as our fiscal agent, so we go with their designated bank. I would mention also that this item was brought to the Finance Committee, so I'm not sure if the chair or the Finance Committee members have any additional comments.
Well, the Finance Committee met yesterday with Janet, and we actually don't have a completed audit until she gets that confirmation, so we can't accept that today. So Finance Committee is coming to the board with the suggestion that we vote as a board to do one of two things: either authorize the Finance Committee to meet again next week and accept the financials, or the whole board reconvene and meet next week for a special meeting to accept the financials. And I don't think we can wait till the next monthly board meeting to do that because of the time issues on this.
And I prefer not to, certainly. The one driving force that really, well, there are several reasons why we have to do an audit. There are certain statutory requirements and that sort of thing, but one of the more important ones in my mind is the annual disclosures that relate to the State Spur 601 project, the bond issuance itself. That requires submittal of the audited financial statements each year, and that's actually due today, which is what drove everything to this date for us.
Those are actually unaudited financial statements today, is that correct?
Well, it's actually the continuing disclosure agreement requires audited. However, it provides that if the financial statements are not yet audited, we can provide unaudited. So I have received from Ms. Pacheco Morton unaudited financial statements, which I can supply to the trustee today in accordance with and pursuant to the disclosure requirements. So we won't be in compliance issues with the State Spur 601 bond issuance. So we're okay there. That's what really drove this thing. Beyond that, there are just general, as Ms. Pacheco Morton noted, the sooner the better, that sort of thing. So there are other requirements that we have to comply with, but we're just not quite there yet.
Okay. Raymond, if both options are valid, I would move that we throw it back to the Finance Committee to meet next week. Hopefully these issues will be cleared up by then, and then you could have authority to do and approve the audit, accept the audit at this point, right?
And I guess the only thing that needs to happen is basically get confirmation from the city that the funds match up. And if the Finance Committee has that confirmation that the funds match up, then they can accept the audit. If they don't have it by then obviously they don't. But once we get that confirmation, that the Finance Committee, Mr. Volk, Mr. Marquez, and Ms. Melendez would then accept that, accept the audit, and then bring it forward to the board, and we could discuss it there and move forward. So I think that's kind of what we were looking at.
That'll work.
Is there a motion to have this?
So moved.
I think, yeah.
That's a motion I made, yeah.
So for the Finance Committee to meet next week?
Next week.
Subject to their satisfactory result of.
Accept the audit. Mm-hmm.
Accept the audit? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries.
Just one question, if I may. What are we worth? I mean, we literally are throwing millions, there's millions and millions of dollars on these presentations, but
I don't think you can put it on your personal financial statement.
No, I wish I could, but I don't think I want to, because if I recall correctly, we're not worth very much. What's our net worth?
Your net asset balance is what, the technical word for it is that you're in a deficit of $58 million.
That's what I thought. That's what I thought. That's what I wanted it for the record.
Well, we're only in a deficit, I believe, and I had this discussion a little bit earlier, is based on how we treat the assets, whether we're expensing the assets. It all depends on what TxDOT's doing. And if TxDOT is treating the assets as an asset as opposed to an expense, then we are having to expense them during a prior year. If we basically create them as an asset, we capitalize them, and if we had capitalized that, that would have made a large difference. Is that correct?
That's correct. Had you capitalized the asset during the construction, you'd have less of a deficit in your net asset balance, and you'd have an asset associated with the construction. However, since TxDOT is currently booking every year, they're booking construction and process associated with all of the costs that the RMA is making, then we have to do a transfer out at the end of the year for any construction in process.
And we would have, since we're building this for TxDOT, had we booked it as an asset last year, we would be then turning that over to TxDOT this year, and between those 2 years, basically, that would have then washed.
That's
out.
correct. It's just a timing difference.
So just as a FYI.
Okay.
Any other questions for Ms. Pacheco-Martin?
Are we reimbursed by TxDOT in the same manner for all projects? Because you mentioned that the SPUR 601 was mentioned.
Well, SPUR 601 was a pass-through total finance agreement. Basically, we went out past the bonds, and then TxDOT is reimbursing us twice a year with a minimum and maximum of traffic counts. So there's traffic counters that were installed, and as those traffic counts comes through, they come to Mr. Tejas and our GEC. Those counts are then verified. And I believe, Raymond, we are then submitting that to TxDOT, is correct?
Correct.
And then those funds are what we're utilizing to pay down the debt. In this particular case, it was a function of the ARA funds, the CBI funds, and the SID bank with the TRZ. So it's a little different funding source with how we did that. But the TRZ is basically paid back with the increase in property values over the base year, which I don't recall what the base year was. 2010. The ARA funds and the CBI funds were the Fed funds that came in, and the TRZ was $30 million, I believe. Is that correct? That we borrowed from the State Infrastructure Bank, with the payback coming from the increase in property taxes in that area. Did I explain that properly?
Yes, sir.
I'm like, you're still broke. So don't.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Item 7, discussion and action on a board resolution authorizing the executive director to execute and submit the required annual compliance report to TxDOT. Mr. Tejas.
The item before you today, item number 7, deals with a recent rule change by TxDOT. Originally, TxDOT required regional mobility authorities to provide various information to TxDOT each year related to the projects that the RMAs are pursuing, the annual audit, the financial statements, as we've been discussing, and some other related information. We were all required to provide them to TxDOT in addition to providing them to the city or county that was a sponsoring agency for that particular regional mobility authority. The rule change that came into effect and just became effective this past fiscal year now says that all of that information should be provided only to the county or the city that created the regional mobility authority. However, TxDOT still requires us to provide them with a compliance report. And it's really 2 compliance reports. First is a report to TxDOT on an annual basis that outlines the projects that the Regional Mobility Authority is pursuing. And then also a compliance report, which is in your backup and was posted online, that identifies all of the items that we have to provide, all of the rules that come into play in governing a regional mobility authority, and a certification that we are complying with each of those. So that's what you see in your backup. For purposes of the project report, if you'll recall, the chair of the Camino Real RMA presented to the Transportation Commission back in October all of the projects that this regional mobility authority is pursuing. The ruling from TxDOT has been that presentation to the Transportation Commission suffices for the project report. So that leaves the compliance report, which again is attached to your backup. Now, I will mention the compliance report that was posted as backup will require a minor adjustment as it relates to the annual audit and the submission of that annual audit to the City of El Paso. And that, of course, is dependent upon what happens hopefully next week with the Finance Committee. So the date will change in terms of those two boxes, but everything else remains the same. So, again, this is a rule change by TxDOT, and this will be required on an annual basis. TxDOT requires us to bring it forward for formal board action. So with that, I recommend approval of this resolution, subject to your questions, of course.
Any questions?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion passes. Item 8, discussion and action on the Executive Director's Report. A, the project development agreement with TxDOT for Loop 375, Americus Avenue, Managed Lanes Project. Item B, the CRRMA relocation to the former El Paso Times Building, March 7th, and the 2013 TxDOT Transportation Forum, Austin, Texas, which I believe is next week. Mr. Tejas?
Right. So under item A, the project development agreement, if you'll recall, last month we met and we were waiting. We actually approved, I believe, you authorized the executive director to sign off on the engagement agreement for the engineering firm that will provide preliminary engineering and environmental services related to the Americas Managed Lanes project. You also authorized the execution of the work authorization for our general engineering consultant to do the oversight for those services. What we realized and we had on the agenda was the execution of a project development agreement with TxDOT that actually gave us the authority to pursue that project. Unfortunately, at that time, TxDOT had not yet finalized the agreement with us. And so what the board proposed and actually adopted was authorization for the executive director to sign off on the project development agreement once that draft was developed and worked through with our attorneys. Unfortunately, through this past month, we did not receive the draft project development agreement from TxDOT. In fact, I heard just this morning that our attorneys have received that draft. I understand that the draft is in very similar form to what was presented to you last month, so I'm hopeful that I will be able to sign that within the next day or so. And of course, I'll keep you posted by email, and I'll bring this item back to you next month. As was adopted last month, if there are material or substantial changes to what was provided to you last month, I will bring that forward and ask for formal action. However, as I understand it, although I haven't seen it, I understand that there are not any material changes, so hopefully I will be able to sign off on that within the next day or two. The importance of that document I should mention, not only for the board but also for one of the engineers here in the room who's actually waiting to begin work, is that without the project development agreement, we cannot commence the preliminary engineering and environmental services. So that's a very important document for us. So I'm hopeful that we can sign that within the next day or two. So that's the update for that.
Do we have once we get started, do we know what the timeline is? And maybe Mr. Head could tell us kind of what the timeline to complete that is?
I don't remember off the top of my head. I'll find that information. We have that in our agreement. I just don't have it with me, and I'll email that to the board later today.
Super. Thank you. Item B, Mr. Tejas?
This is an update. This is kind of an ongoing item for our executive director's report. I will actually be relocating on March 7th. That's the latest that we've heard. And everything.
That can't be a vacation day, Mr. Tejas.
No, sir.
I'm sorry.
There's too much paper up there to leave on that day. That's going to be a big day for us. So as I mentioned last month, I will be moving into the Times Building second floor with the deputy city managers in that area. So everything remains essentially the same. So I'll keep you posted on that. But March 7th is the current date. And I'll mention.
And our March board meeting?
Well, our March board meeting, what I understand as of right now is that IT and the City 15 folks are outfitting the library space for the interim public meetings. It's City Council, our board, and the other boards that operate within the City of El Paso. So our March board meeting will likely be in the library. However, when we have our next Finance Committee, that will likely still be here in City Hall, since that will be next week.
How long do we anticipate meeting at the library? Do we know what that time frame is?
We don't. Not yet. But I understand that they have begun work on the first floor. The way that they've explained that they're sequencing the work at the El Paso Times building is that they did the second floor first. They moved all of the Times employees down to the first floor, and since then, I believe the Times employees have since moved out. So they've begun full force working on the bottom floor. That first floor is where city council chambers will be. So once that's complete, then obviously they'll stop using the library. We'll be able to use that facility as well.
Super.
So I'll continue to keep you updated with any information that I get. But for now, I believe we'll be meeting in March in the library. Item C then is the annual TxDOT Transportation Forum Conference. This year, I'll be attending, and I'll be joined by Mr. Adame and also Mr. Dominguez. So when we come back, we'll brief you on the board in March. And that meeting is Monday and Tuesday of next week. So subject to your questions, that's all I have for you today.
Any questions?
Do we have the RMA credit card available?
Yes, it's in your pocket.
Jesus. Can't get a break today.
Any other questions?
None.
With that, is there a motion to adjourn? Second? All those in favor? All those opposed? We are adjourned at 9:45 a.m. on February 13th, 2013.